The smirk on Charlotte Vane's face was the first thing everyone noticed. A cold, triumphant curve of red lipstick that screamed victory. She sat in the front row, watching her lover, Derek Cross, destroy his wife on the stand. They thought they had pulled off the perfect crime, painting Laura Cross as a paranoid, unstable alcoholic to steal her family's multi-million-dollar estate. Laura looked defeated, trembling in her seat, seemingly inches from a total breakdown. But what Charlotte and Derek didn't know was that the trembling wasn't fear. It was anticipation, because tucked inside an unassuming envelope on the defense table was a digital recorder that had been running when they thought no one was listening, and when Judge Moore hits play, that smirk is going to vanish, right before Charlotte hits the floor. The air inside courtroom 4B of the Travis County Civil Courthouse was stale, recycled, and thick with the scent of impending doom. It was October 12th, a Thursday, and the rain battering the high windows seemed to match the mood of the woman sitting at the defendant's table. Laura Cross, once the vibrant CEO of Cross Atlantic Logistics and a socialite known for her sharp wit and sharper fashion sense, looked like a ghost of her former self. She wore a grey wool cardigan that swallowed her petite frame, her hair pulled back in a messy, low bun. She stared at the mahogany table, her hands gripping a tissue so tightly her knuckles were white. To the gallery, to the press, and most importantly to Judge Harriet Moore, Laura looked like a broken woman. But appearances, as Laura knew better than anyone, were often a carefully constructed lie. Across the aisle sat her husband of 12 years, Derek Cross. He was the picture of grieving concern. His suit was a tailored navy Brooks Brothers, his tie a somber maroon. He leaned forward, whispering something to his high-priced attorney, a man named Bartholomew Bart Hayes, known in legal circles as the Butcher of Austin. And then there was the third point of this toxic triangle. Sitting in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution, was Charlotte Vane. Charlotte was 24, a former intern at Derek's architectural firm, and she made no effort to hide her presence. She wasn't technically a party to the divorce proceedings, but she was the catalyst. She wore a sleek black dress that was just a shade too tight for a somber court hearing, and her eyes darted between Derek and Laura with a predatory gleam. When Laura dared to glance up, she locked eyes with Charlotte. Charlotte didn't look away. Instead, the corner of her mouth quirked up. It was a subtle, microscopic smirk, invisible to the judge but screaming loud and clear to Laura. "I won, you lost, make way. Order," Judge Moore said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. She was a woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and a reputation for having zero patience for theatrics. "We are back on the record in the matter of Cross v. Cross. Mr. Hayes, call your next witness." Bart Hayes stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, we call Dr. Lawrence Huff to the stand." Laura felt a hand on her arm. It was her lawyer, Silvio Reed. Silvio was the opposite of Bart Hayes. He drove a 10-year-old Volvo, worked out of a strip mall office, and wore suits that looked like they had been bought off the rack at a department store sale. But Laura had hired him for one reason. He was the only lawyer in the city who believed her when she said she wasn't crazy. "Steady, Laura," Silvio whispered, his voice a low rumble. "Let them build their tower. The higher they build it, the harder it falls." Laura took a shaky breath. "He's going to lie, Silvio. Dr. Huff is on Derek's payroll." "I know," Silvio said, scribbling on his notepad. "Let him lie. Perjury is a beautiful thing when you can prove it." Dr. Lawrence Huff took the stand. He was a psychiatrist with a hefty consulting fee, known for testifying in high-stakes custody and estate battles. He adjusted his glasses and swore to tell the truth. "Dr. Huff," Hayes began, pacing the floor like a shark in a tank, "you conducted an evaluation of Mrs. Laura Cross 3 months ago. Is that correct?" "I did," Huff replied, his voice smooth and practiced. "And what were your findings?" Huff looked directly at Laura, his expression full of fake pity. "It is my professional opinion that Mrs. Cross is suffering from severe paranoid delusions, exacerbated by acute alcohol dependency. She exhibits signs of early-onset dementia and is incapable of managing her own finances, let alone making rational decisions regarding the joint assets." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Laura closed her eyes. It was the narrative Derek had been spinning for a year. He had gaslit her, moved her keys, changed passwords, and even spiked her evening tea with sedatives to make her slur her words at dinner parties. He had manufactured a breakdown, brick by brick. "She believes," Huff continued, "that her husband is conspiring against her. She believes she is being followed. These are classic symptoms of persecution mania." "So in your opinion," Hayes pressed, "if the court were to leave the Cross family estate in her hands, it would be disastrous?" "It would be negligent," Huff said firmly. "She needs institutional care, not a checkbook." Derek wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. Charlotte in the gallery shifted her legs, the smirk widening just a fraction. She leaned forward, whispering to the woman next to her, likely a friend she brought along to watch the show. Laura's heart hammered against her ribs. It was infuriating to sit there and be dissected, to have her intelligence insulted by a man she had never met until Derek forced the appointment. "Your witness," Hayes said, sitting down with a satisfied thump. Silvio Reed stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He looked like a confused uncle trying to find his reading glasses. He shuffled some papers, scratched his head, and walked towards the witness stand. "Dr. Huff," Silvio said, smiling politely, "you've been practicing for 20 years? 22, Huff corrected. Right. And you're very busy. I see here you've testified in over 40 cases in the last 2 years. That's a lot of evaluations." "I am in high demand," Huff said coldly. "Indeed. Now, regarding my client's delusions, you mentioned she thinks she's being followed?" "Yes. She claimed a grey sedan was tailing her for weeks. And you classified this as a delusion?" "Because there was no evidence of it, and Mr. Cross confirmed he had no knowledge of any such thing," Huff said, sounding bored. Silvio nodded. "Right. Mr. Cross confirmed it. Dr. Huff, did you ever look at the security footage from the gate of the Cross estate on the dates Laura mentioned?" Huff blinked. My evaluation was clinical, based on patient interviews." "So you didn't check?" "It wasn't my job to play detective," Huff snapped. "Fair enough," Silvio said, turning back to his table. "No further questions." Hayes looked confused. He expected a fight, but Silvio had barely thrown a jab. Charlotte looked disappointed in the gallery. She wanted blood. "Is that it, Mr. Reed?" Judge Moore asked, peering over her spectacles. "For this witness, yes, Your Honor," Silvio said. Laura looked at Silvio, panic rising in her throat. "Why didn't you ask him about the payments?" she hissed. "We know Derek paid him double his usual fee." "Not yet," Silvio whispered, his eyes hard. "We need Derek on the stand. We need him to commit to the lie under oath. Once he does that, there's no going back." After a brief recess, the moment arrived. "The defense calls Mr. Derek Cross to the stand," Hayes announced. Derek stood up, buttoning his jacket with a solemn grace. He walked to the stand, nodding respectfully to the judge. He was handsome, in a rugged, aging athlete kind of way. He had the kind of face that voters trusted and women adored. It was the face that had charmed Laura 12 years ago, when she was grieving her father's death and vulnerable to a man who promised to take care of everything. He took the oath, his voice deep and steady. "Mr. Cross," Hayes began, softening his tone, "this has been a difficult year for you, hasn't it?" "It has," Derek said, looking at his hands. "I love my wife. I've always loved Laura. Watching her deteriorate like this, it's been the hardest thing I've ever had to do." "You've tried to get her help?" "Countless times," Derek said, looking up with earnest eyes. "I hired the best doctors. I tried to get her into rehab in Malibu. She refused. She accused me of trying to lock her away. And the finances? Hayes asked. Why are you petitioning for full control of the Cross family trust? Because she's spending it erratically, Derek lied smoothly. She's vulnerable to scams. She buys things she doesn't remember. I'm just trying to protect what her father built. I don't want the money for myself. I make my own living. I just want to make sure there's something left for her care. It was a masterful performance. If Laura didn't know him, she would have believed him. Mr. Cross, Hayes said, lowering his voice. There have been rumors, allegations from your wife, about infidelity, about a woman named Charlotte Vane. The courtroom went silent. In the gallery, Charlotte froze, her face a mask of innocent shock. Derek sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. Laura, her paranoia fixes on people. Charlotte is a junior associate at my firm. She's young, ambitious, and talented. I've mentored her, yes. But that's all. Laura sees a young woman and invents a threat. It's a symptom of her condition. It's tragic, really. She's destroyed this poor girl's reputation because of her delusions. Laura felt bile rise in her throat. Poor girl. That poor girl had sent Laura text messages from burner phones detailing exactly what she and Derek did in Laura's own bed while Laura was away for treatment. So to be clear, Hayes asked, there is no romantic relationship between you and Miss Vane? Absolutely not, Derek said firmly. I am a married man, and despite everything, I am loyal to my wife. Thank you, Derek, Hayes said. Your witness. Derek remained relaxed as Silvio Reed stood up. This was it. The shark versus the minnow. Or so they thought. Silvio walked to the center of the room. He wasn't holding any papers this time. He just leaned against the wooden railing, looking thoughtful. Mr. Cross, Silvio said, you say you want to protect Laura's assets. I do. Because she's mentally incompetent. Because she is unwell, Derek corrected gently. Right, unwell. You mentioned that she imagines things. Paranoia. Thinking people are watching her. Yes. And you mentioned Charlotte Vane. You said you are merely a mentor to her. That is correct, Silvio nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. He held it up to the light. It was innocuous. Tiny. Mr. Cross, Silvio said, his voice hardening slightly. Do you recognize the date September 14th? Derek frowned, his confidence flickering for a microsecond. I don't recall that specific date. Just a Tuesday, I assume? A Friday, actually, Silvio said. It was the night Laura was admitted to St. Jude's Hospital for what you claimed was an alcohol overdose. Yes, Derek said, his voice dropping. A terrible night. You were at the hospital with her? Of course. By her side. The whole night? I stepped out for fresh air, perhaps. But I was there. Silvio walked back to his table and picked up a thick stack of papers. See, that's interesting, because we have sworn affidavits from the nursing staff that you left the hospital at 9:15 p.m. and didn't return until 7 a.m. the next morning. Derek shifted in his seat. I must have gone home to shower. I was exhausted. Home, Silvio repeated. To the estate. Yes. And you were alone? Derek narrowed his eyes. Yes, I was alone. Silvio turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit C. This involves CCTV footage from the Cross estate, but also something else. Something Mr. Cross isn't aware exists. Hayes jumped up. Objection! Ambush! We haven't seen this evidence. On the contrary, Silvio said calmly. I emailed these files to Mr. Hayes's office this morning at 8 a.m., adhering to the 24-hour discovery rule for rebuttal evidence. Perhaps if you checked your inbox, instead of rehearsing your opening statement, you'd know. Judge Moore suppressed a smile. Overruled. Proceed, Mr. Reed. Silvio plugged the USB drive into the court's AV system. A large screen descended from the ceiling. "Now, Mr. Cross," Silvio said, "Laura has been paranoid. She thought you were plotting against her. She thought you were gaslighting her. She thought you were having an affair. So 6 months ago, she did the one thing a sane, rational person does when they suspect they are being lied to." Silvio paused for effect. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Charlotte in the back had stopped chewing her gum. "She hired a private investigator," Silvio said, "but not to follow you. To bug the house." Derek's face went pale. "That's illegal. In our own home, actually," Silvio interrupted. "The house is solely in Laura's name. It's her property. She can record whatever she likes in the common areas." And on the night of September 14th, while Laura was in a hospital bed hooked up to an IV, you weren't alone in the library, were you? Derek said nothing. He stared at the screen. "Let's play the clip," Silvio said. The audio crackled through the courtroom speakers first, followed by a grainy but high-definition video feed. It was a black-and-white night vision angle, clearly hidden on a bookshelf, capturing the sprawling library of the Cross estate. The timestamp read 21:45. The door opened. Derek walked in. He wasn't wearing the somber suit he had on now. He was in jeans and a t-shirt, holding 2 glasses of wine. And following him, laughing, was Charlotte Vane. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Judge Moore banged her gavel. "Silence, or I will clear this courtroom." On the screen, Charlotte took the wine glass. She looked comfortable. Too comfortable. She kicked off her heels and curled up on Laura's favorite leather armchair. "God, finally," the voice of the digital Charlotte echoed through the silent courtroom. "I thought the old hag would never pass out. Did you give her the full dose?" In the witness box, the real Derek Cross closed his eyes. His face was turning a shade of grey that matched the stormy sky outside. On the screen, Derek sat on the edge of the desk. "Enough to knock out a horse. The doctors at St. Jude's are idiots. They'll see the alcohol in her blood and assume she drank herself into a stupor again. They won't look for the interaction with the sedatives." In the gallery, the real Charlotte Vane let out a small, strangled sound. The smirk was gone. Her skin had taken on a waxen, terrified sheen. She looked like she wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't work. The video continued. "So," Charlotte said on screen, swirling her wine, "how long until we get the power of attorney?" "I'm tired of waiting, Derek. I want to redo this kitchen. It smells like old money and depression." "Soon," Derek assured her, walking over to kiss her forehead. "Huff is on board. I promised him a $50,000 bonus once the conservatorship is granted. He'll testify she's incompetent. Once I have control, we ship her off to that facility in Nevada, the one with no cell service. She'll be out of the way for good. And the money? All ours, baby. The robotics shares alone are worth $20 million. We sell, we cash out, we live like kings." The video froze. Silvio Reed turned off the screen. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering into a million pieces. Silvio turned back to Derek. Derek was gripping the railing of the witness stand so hard his knuckles were purple. He looked like a trapped animal. "Mr. Cross," Silvio said, his voice dangerously low, "you just testified under oath that you had no romantic relationship with Miss Vane. You testified that you never drugged your wife. You testified that Dr. Huff was an impartial expert." Silvio leaned in. "Would you like to amend your testimony, or should I ask the bailiff to read you your Miranda rights right now?" "Aye," Derek croaked. He looked at his lawyer. Hayes was staring at his table, refusing to make eye contact. Hayes knew when a ship was sinking, and he wasn't going to go down with it. "And Miss Vane," Silvio said, turning completely around to face the gallery. He pointed a finger directly at Charlotte. Charlotte flinched as if he had thrown a stone at her. "I believe," Silvio said to the judge, that the woman in the gallery, Miss Charlotte Vane, is a co-conspirator in attempted murder and fraud, and since she is present—" Charlotte stood up, her knees knocked together. She looked at Derek, pleading for him to do something, to fix it, but Derek was staring at his shoes. "I didn't," Charlotte stammered, her voice high and thin. "It was we were just talking." Judge Moore's eyes were like lasers. "Bailiff," she barked, "bar the doors. No one leaves this room." Charlotte looked at the heavy oak doors, then back at the judge, and finally at Laura. Laura hadn't moved. She just watched, her face impassive, her eyes cold and clear. The realization hit Charlotte like a physical blow. The money was gone. The future was gone. The man was a fraud, and she was going to prison. The blood drained from Charlotte's face in a rush. Her eyes rolled back into her head. She swayed once, twice, and then, with a soft thud that echoed in the silent room, she collapsed into the aisle, passing out cold. "Medical assistance!" Judge Moore shouted. But Laura didn't look at the unconscious girl. She looked at her husband. "Well, Derek," Laura said softly, her voice carrying through the stunned room, "it looks like you're finally alone." The chaos that followed Charlotte Vane's collapse was absolute, a cacophony of shouting voices and shuffling feet that shattered the decorum of the courtroom. Judge Moore was hammering her gavel with the rhythmic intensity of a blacksmith forging steel. "Clear the gallery. I want this courtroom secured immediately. Bailiff, take Mr. Cross into custody." Derek Cross stood frozen in the witness box. The confident, grieving husband mask had disintegrated, leaving behind a terrified, hollow shell. He looked at the screen where his own voice had just condemned him, then at the unconscious form of his mistress being attended to by court security, and finally at his lawyer. "Bart!" Derek screamed, desperation cracking his voice. "Bart, do something! Object! Tell them it's a deep fake! It's AI! Tell them!" Bart Hayes, the butcher of Austin, was already packing his briefcase. He didn't look up. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin, grim line. He knew the difference between a difficult case and a career-ending catastrophe. He had just suborned perjury, unknowingly perhaps, but the optics were lethal. "Bart!" Derek yelled again as a burly bailiff grabbed his arm. Hayes paused, snapping his briefcase shut. He looked at Derek with a mixture of disgust and professional detachment. "Mr. Cross, I am withdrawing as your counsel effective immediately. You have perjured yourself, implicated me in a fraud scheme, and frankly, I need to call my malpractice carrier. Don't call my office." Derek's jaw dropped. "You can't leave me." "Watch me," Hayes muttered, pushing past the bar and striding out of the courtroom without looking back. Laura watched it all from her seat. She hadn't moved. She was an island of calm in the hurricane. Silvio Reed leaned over to her, a rare, genuine smile breaking his stony face. "I think that went well," Silvio whispered. "We're not done," Laura replied, her voice icy. "He's still breathing." Two paramedics rushed in, wheeling a stretcher down the center aisle. They swarmed over Charlotte, checking her vitals. She groaned, her eyelids fluttering. As she came to, the first thing she saw was the ceiling of the courtroom, and then the face of a uniformed police officer staring down at her. "Miss Vane," the officer said, not unkindly but firmly, "you're going to be transported to St. David's Hospital for evaluation. An officer will accompany you. You are currently detained, pending an investigation into conspiracy to commit murder." Charlotte let out a sob, a raw, ugly sound that echoed off the wood paneling. "He made me do it!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Derek, who was being cuffed by the bailiff. "He told me she was dying anyway. He said we were just speeding it up." "Shut up, Charlotte!" Derek roared, his face turning a violent shade of red. "She's lying! She's an unstable stalker." "That's enough," Judge Moore's voice boomed. "Get them out of here, both of them. And get Dr. Huff back in here. I want a warrant issued for his arrest before he makes it to the parking lot." Laura stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her grey cardigan. As the bailiffs marched Derek past the defence table, he locked eyes with her. "Laura!" he pleaded, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a pathetic, wheedling tone. "Laura, honey, please, you know me. This is a misunderstanding. I was stressed. I was confused." Laura looked at him. She didn't see the man she married. She didn't say a monster. She just saw a stranger, a pathetic, greedy stranger. "I do know you, Derek," she said softly. "That's the problem. I finally know you." As they dragged him out the side door, the press, who had been allowed to remain in the back, were going frantic. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. The story of the loving husband was dead. The story of the Black Widow was dead. The story of the Laura Cross revenge tour had just begun. 3 hours later, the atmosphere shifted from the frantic energy of the courtroom to the sterile, fluorescent-lit gloom of the Austin Police Department's interrogation rooms. Room A held Derek Cross. Room B held Charlotte Vane. Detective Marcus Miller stood in the observation hallway, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the monitors. He was a veteran homicide detective who had seen it all, but even he had to admire the efficiency of Laura Cross's trap. She hadn't just caught them, she had gift-wrapped them. "So," Miller said to his partner, Officer Sarah Jenkins, "who breaks first?" "The girl," Jenkins said immediately. "She's 24 and thinks hard time is a weekend without Wi-Fi. She's terrified." "I don't know," Miller mused. "Derek is a narcissist. Narcissists don't like taking the fall for anyone. He'll throw her under the bus to save his own skin. Nest." Miller walked into Room A first. Derek was sitting at the metal table, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. He looked up sharply as Miller entered. "I want a lawyer," Derek spat. "I know my rights. I want the best criminal defense attorney in the state. You can have a lawyer, Mr. Cross," Miller said, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. "But seeing as your assets are currently frozen by a court order issued 20 minutes ago, you might be looking at a public defender." Derek blanched. "Frozen?" "Judge Moore doesn't play around. She froze the joint accounts, and since the prenup states the house is Laura's, well, you're currently homeless and broke." Derek slumped. The reality was setting in. Miller leaned forward. "Look, Derek, here's the situation. We have the video. We have the audio. We have Charlotte next door crying her eyes out. We found the search history on your laptop for how to induce liver failure and untraceable poisons. You're cooked." "I never touched her," Derek insisted. "It was just talk." "Fantasy." "Fantasy?" Miller raised an eyebrow. "We checked the toxicology report from Laura's admission to St. Jude S. We found traces of benzodiazepines and high levels of ethanol, but we also found something else in her hair follicle test. Arsenic." Derek's eyes went wide. "Arsenic? I never used arsenic. That's insane." "Is it?" Miller bluffed. "Because Charlotte says you bought rat poison 3 months ago." "She's a liar!" Derek slammed his fist on the table. "That psycho! She brought the pills. She crushed them into Laura's wine. She said, 'Let's help nature along.' I told her no, but she did it anyway. I didn't stop her. That's negligence, maybe. But murder? That was her." Miller suppressed a smile. "So you admit there was a plot to poison your wife? But Charlotte was the mastermind." "Yes, she's obsessed with the lifestyle. She wanted the house, the cars. She used me." Miller stood up. "Thanks, Derek. That's very helpful." He walked out and went straight to Room B. Charlotte was a mess. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, and she was hugging herself, rocking back and forth. "Charlotte," Miller said gently, sitting down. "Derek is talking." Charlotte looked up, eyes wide with fear. What did he say?" "He says it was all your idea," Miller lied. "He says you bought the poison. He says you slipped it into Laura's drink. He's painting you as a gold-digging psychopath who manipulated him." Charlotte's mouth opened in shock, Then anger, hot and fierce, flooded her face. "That bastard!" she hissed. "That lying, cowardly bastard! He's cutting a deal, Charlotte," Miller said. "He's going to testify against you. Unless what? Unless you tell us the truth. All of it. The dates, the times, the specific drugs. If you cooperate, the DA might look at a plea for conspiracy instead of attempted murder." Charlotte didn't hesitate. The dam broke. "It started in June," she sobbed. "He said Laura was taking too long to die. He stole prescription pads from Dr. Huff's office. Huff left them out on purpose. Derek wrote the scripts for sedatives. He made me pick them up at pharmacies in different towns so it wouldn't be traced to him. He put the powder in her protein shakes in the morning. He laughed about it. He said, 'Here's to her health.' It was him. It was all him." Miller nodded, his face impassive, but internally he was cheering. They had them. They had the loving husband and the mistress tearing each other's throats out. A week later, Laura Cross sat on the veranda of her estate. The rain had cleared, and the Texas sun was shining over the manicured lawns. Silvio Reed sat across from her, a glass of iced tea in his hand. The house was quiet. The staff, who had been fiercely loyal to Laura and had helped hide the cameras, were going about their work with a lightness that hadn't been there in years. "The district attorney accepted the evidence," Silvio said. "Derek is being held without bail. Flight risk, given his offshore accounts, which, by the way, the forensic accountants found this morning." Laura took a sip of her water. She looked younger than she had in court. The grey cardigan was gone, replaced by a sharp white blazer. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders. "And Charlotte?" Laura asked. "She took a plea deal yesterday. She's giving them everything on Derek and Dr. Huff in exchange for 10 years. She'll be out in 5 with good behaviour, but her life is over. No firm will hire her." Laura nodded, staring out at the horizon. "It's strange, Silvio." "What is?" "I loved him once," she said. "I really did. When my father died, I felt like I was drowning. Derek was the life raft. I didn't realize the raft was leaking until it was almost too late." Silvio set his glass down. "You did something incredible, Laura. Most people would have crumbled. You let them think you were crazy. You let them gaslight you. That takes a level of steel I haven't seen in 30 years of practice." Laura turned to him, a dry smile on her lips. "I didn't just let them, Silvio. I encouraged it." Silvio raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "I knew about the affair 2 years ago," Laura revealed. "I saw a text on his phone. Just one. But it was enough. I hired the PI then. But I realized that if I divorced him then, purely for adultery, he would still get half. Texas is a community property state. He would have walked away with $10 million of my father's money." Silvio stared at her. "So you waited?" "I waited," Laura said coldly. "I needed him to commit a crime. I needed him to try to steal everything, or worse. I needed cause to void the prenup and strip him of every penny." "So the drinking, apple juice and water in wine bottles," Laura said. "I poured the real wine down the sink. When he drugged me, I pretended to pass out. I held the pills under my tongue and spit them out in the bathroom later. I collected them. I gave them to the police this morning as physical evidence." Silvio shook his head in disbelief. "You played the long game. You put your life at risk." "I calculated the risk," Laura said. "I knew Derek. He's a coward. He wouldn't use a gun or a knife. He wanted it to look like an accident. That gave me time." She looked back at the house her father built, the house Derek tried to steal. "Dr. Huff was the wild card," she admitted. "I didn't think a medical professional would be so corrupt. But once he signed that affidavit declaring me incompetent, I knew I had them. That was the trap snapping shut." Silvio chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Remind me never to cross you, Laura." "You're on the payroll, Silvio," she smiled. "You're safe." 6 months had passed since the day Charlotte Vane fainted in Judge Moore's courtroom, but the heat surrounding the case of the state of Texas versus Derek Cross hadn't cooled by a single degree. If anything, it had boiled over into a national obsession. The cross-vein conspiracy, as the tabloids dubbed it, had everything the public craved. Immense wealth, a sordid affair, a dying wife who wasn't actually dying, and a husband whose handsome face hid a soul of absolute rot. The criminal trial was held in the larger, more imposing Travis County Criminal Justice Center. The atmosphere inside courtroom 8A was electric, a stark contrast to the quiet civil proceedings where Laura had first sprung her trap. Derek Cross sat at the defense table, but he was no longer the composed, grieving husband. 6 months in county lockup, denied bail due to the flight risk posed by his offshore accounts, had eroded him. His skin was pasty, his athletic build had wasted away into a nervous gauntness, and his eyes darted around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped rat. He had fired his previous legal team. In a last-ditch effort to save himself, he had liquidated his 401k, the only asset Laura hadn't been able to freeze, to hire Preston Gills. Gills was a Dallas attorney known as the Shark in the Armani suit. He was theatrical, aggressive, and morally flexible. His strategy was simple and desperate: the Gone Girl defense. He planned to argue that Laura Cross was a mastermind who had psychologically manipulated a weak husband and a naive mistress into a role play that she then framed as a crime. It was a ludicrous theory, but Gills was a master of smoke and mirrors. Laura sat in the first row behind the prosecution, flanked by Silvio Reed. She wore a suit of deep midnight blue, a color of authority, not mourning. She watched the back of Derek's head, waiting for him to turn around. He never did. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Moore had recused herself from the criminal trial to avoid conflict, leaving the case in the hands of Judge Anthony P. Calloway, a man with a face like a bulldog and a reputation for maximum sentencing. The first major blow came on the 3rd day of the trial. The prosecution called Charlotte Vane. When the side door opened, a hush fell over the gallery. Charlotte shuffled in, her ankles shackled, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with her pale, terrified face. She had taken a plea deal, 10 years in exchange for full testimony. She looked nothing like the smug girl who had smirked at Laura. She looked like a child who had woken up in a nightmare. "Miss Vane," Assistant District Attorney Hayes began, "please tell the jury what the defendant, Derek Cross, told you regarding his wife's health." Charlotte's voice was a whisper. He told me she had a failing liver. He said she was an alcoholic who was drinking herself to death anyway. He said we were just easing her passing, putting her out of her misery. And did he take active steps to ease this passing? Yes, Charlotte sobbed. He stole prescription pads from Dr. Huff's office. He wrote the scripts. He made me drive to pharmacies in Waco and San Antonio to fill them so they wouldn't be traced to Austin. He crushed the pills. He put them in her evening tea. Did he ever express remorse? Charlotte shook her head, tears dripping onto the witness stand. No, he laughed. He called it the retirement plan. He used a spreadsheet to calculate how much money we would have the day she died. He had a countdown on his phone. The jury recoiled. Derek stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. Then came Preston Gills for the cross-examination. He didn't approach Charlotte gently. He lunged. "Miss Vane!" Gills boomed, pacing the floor. "You were sleeping with a married man, were you not?" "Yes," Charlotte whispered. "You wanted his money, didn't you? You wanted his house? You said in the video, and I quote, 'I want to redo this kitchen.' Is that correct?" "Yes." "So isn't it true," Gills leaned in, his voice dripping with venom, "that you were the driving force? That you were a scorned woman who realized the money wasn't coming, so you decided to flip on the man you couldn't control? Isn't it true that Derek Cross never administered a single pill, and that you did it all?" "No," Charlotte shrieked, her composure breaking. "He made me. He said if I didn't help him, he'd fire me and ruin my career. He told me he loved me. He used you." Gills sneered. "And now you're using the court to get revenge for a broken heart." It was brutal. Gills managed to plant a seed of doubt, not that Derek was innocent, but that perhaps Charlotte was the true architect of the murder plot. The defense's momentum hit a brick wall when Dr. Lawrence Huff took the stand. Huff, unlike Charlotte, hadn't taken a plea deal quickly enough. He was facing charges of medical malpractice and conspiracy. He testified with a bitter, resentful monotone. "Mr. Gills," the prosecutor asked on redirect, "why did you sign the affidavit declaring Laura Cross incompetent?" "Because Derek Cross paid me to," Huff stated flatly. "How much?" $50,000 initially, with a promise of $200,000 once he gained power of attorney over the estate. The prosecutor projected a bank statement onto the screens in the courtroom. "Is this the wire transfer?" "Yes, from a shell company called DC Architectural Consulting." "Yes." Derek's lawyer tried to object, claiming hearsay, but the paper trail was ironclad. The jury saw the greed in black and white numbers. Derek hadn't just cheated. He had bought a diagnosis to enslave his wife. The climax of the trial arrived when the defense, in a move of supreme arrogance, called Laura Cross to the stand. Gills believed he could rattle her. He believed he could make her look like the unstable, paranoid woman Dr. Huff had described. Laura walked to the stand with the grace of a queen ascending her throne. She swore the oath and sat down, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Mrs. Cross," Gills began, smiling like a predator, "you testified that you knew about the affair for 2 years. Is that correct?" "That is correct." "And you knew your husband was, as you claim, poisoning you for 6 months?" "I suspected it. I confirmed it when I installed the cameras." "So," Gills paused for theatrical effect, turning to the jury, "you sat in that house, night after night, letting a man you claim is a murderer sleep down the hall. You accepted drinks from him? You watched him?" "I did." "Why?" Gills shouted. "Why not call the police immediately? Why wait? Unless you enjoyed the game. Unless you wanted to entrap him." Laura leaned forward into the microphone. Her voice was low, smooth, and devastatingly clear. "Mr. Gills, if I had called the police the day I found out about the affair, Derek would have divorced me. We have no prenuptial clause for infidelity. He would have taken half of my father's company. He would have walked away with $10 million to spend on his mistress." The courtroom was silent. "I didn't wait because I enjoyed it," Laura continued, her eyes locking onto Derek's. "I waited because I refused to let a man who tried to kill me walk away with a retirement fund. I waited until he crossed the line, from adultery to attempted murder. I waited until I could bury him." Gills stuttered. So you admit you manipulated the situation?" "I admit I survived it," Laura said coldly. "Derek bought the poison. Derek poured the wine. Derek signed the checks. I just turned the lights on so everyone could see." "So?" Gills had no response. He had tried to paint her as a villain, but she had just painted herself as a survivor who was smarter than every man in the room. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, couldn't even look at Derek. "In the matter of the state of Texas versus Derek Cross," the foreman read, his hands shaking slightly, "on the count of attempted capital murder, we find the defendant guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. Derek closed his eyes, his head dropping into his hands. "On the count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, guilty. On the count of money laundering, guilty. On the count of witness tampering, guilty." It was a clean sweep. The loving husband was officially a monster. Preston Gills began furiously scribbling notes for an appeal that everyone knew would fail. The sentencing hearing took place 2 days later. This was the moment Laura had been waiting for. She was allowed to give a victim impact statement. She stood at the podium, facing the judge, with Derek seated just 10 feet away. "Your Honor," Laura began, her voice steady. For 12 years, I shared my life with this man. I supported his career. I nursed him when he was sick. I trusted him with my life. She turned slowly to face Derek. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Derek," she said, addressing him directly, "you didn't just try to kill me. You tried to erase me. You tried to convince the world I was crazy, so you could lock me in a dark room and forget I existed. You wanted my money, but you also wanted to steal my dignity." She paused. "The tragedy isn't that I lost my husband. The tragedy is that I never had one. I was sleeping next to a calculator who was just waiting for the numbers to add up. Well, Derek, the audit is finished, and you are bankrupt." She turned back to the judge. "I ask for the maximum sentence, not for revenge, but for safety. Because a man who can smile while he poisons his wife's tea is not a man who can be rehabilitated." Judge Calloway nodded slowly. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Derek. "Mr. Cross," the judge said, his voice gravelly, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion, and I have seen crimes of desperation. This was neither. This was a crime of cold, calculated avarice. You are a predator in a suit." Derek tried to stand. "Your Honor, please, sit down," Calloway barked. "Mr. Cross, you are sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder, to run consecutively with 10 years for fraud. You will not be eligible for parole until you are 75 years old. You may serve your time thinking about the lifestyle you felt you were entitled to." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. The bailiffs moved in immediately. There were no gentle touches this time. They hauled Derek up by his arms. He looked back at the gallery, searching for anyone. Charlotte, his lawyer, a friend. But Charlotte was already in a cell. His lawyer was packing his bag, and his friends had abandoned him the moment the indictment came down. He looked at Laura one last time. "Laura," he mouthed. It wasn't a plea. It was just a recognition. He finally saw her. He finally saw the lioness. Laura didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply watched him until the side door closed, swallowing him into the system. Outside the courthouse, the steps were mobbed. The rain had returned, a light drizzle that made the pavement shine. Silvio Reed held a large black umbrella over Laura's head as they descended the stairs towards the waiting press. Mrs. Cross, is it true you're suing the architectural firm?" "Mrs. Cross, what will you do now?" Laura stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She took a deep breath of the wet, cool air. It tasted like ozone and freedom. She looked at the cameras, her face unreadable behind dark sunglasses. "Justice was served," she said simply. "The trash has been taken out." "What's next for you, Laura?" a reporter shouted. "You have the estate, the company, everything. What are you going to do with your freedom?" Laura paused. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in months. She thought about the empty, silent mansion on the hill. The mansion that had been a prison, then a crime scene, and was now just a house. "Well," Laura said, her voice light, "I have a kitchen to renovate. It smells like old money and bad memories. I'm thinking of knocking down some walls. I want an open concept. I want to be able to see everything coming." She ducked into the waiting car, the door thudding shut with a solid, reassuring weight. As the driver pulled away, merging into the Austin traffic, Laura Cross leaned back in the leather seat. She pulled her phone out and opened her contacts. She scrolled down to Derek Cross. She pressed delete. Then she scrolled to Charlotte Vane. Delete. She put the phone down and looked out the window. The rain was stopping. The sun was breaking through the clouds, bathing the city in gold. It was a good day to start over. And that, my friends, is the chilling conclusion to the story of Laura Cross. She didn't just survive. She conquered. She proved that when you back a woman into a corner, you'd better make sure she doesn't have a plan and a recording device. Derek and Charlotte are rotting in prison, and Laura is living her best life, free of the toxic weight that dragged her down. It's a brutal lesson, Be careful who you trust, and never underestimate someone's will to survive. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It seriously helps the algorithm and lets me know you enjoy these deep dive storytelling videos. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to hear the next twist-filled saga. What would you have done in Laura's shoes? Would you have called the cops immediately? Or would you have played the long game like she did to ensure they lost everything? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay sharp and watch your six.